as well. There's so much stuff going on. Okay, recording. It should be on Facebook as well, and it's on Zoom. So I think we've got our bases covered. Thanks everyone for coming in for our daily Zoom session. We've been talking to very cool people for 2 weeks now, and everyone has had, really great insights and ideas for how to survive and adapt to this new situation. So I thought it'd be really cool to talk to Josh about this, because someone who's an industry leader. I'll bestow that title upon you. And also just to talk about, how much the world has changed since we saw each other, which was only about 3 weeks ago.
Yes. So the last time Jared and I saw each other was actually in Singapore 3 weeks ago. Jared was cruising around with Stu Larson, taking photos and doing all the wonderful stuff he does. But so that was because you guys couldn't go to Japan, right?
Yes, the plan was to play in Japan because it's one of Stu's favorite places ever. But there were concerns. There were no border closures or anything yet, but some locals were telling us that we might not be able to get out of Japan if we entered Japan. So we had to last minute change everything.
But it was certainly interesting comparing how Singapore handled it early on compared to Australia in terms of closing their borders down and stuff like that. And also, like when we went, so Stu played at a cafe club sort of thing in Singapore, and to get in there, they checked everybody's temperature with, like a digital thermometer, and you had to, if you had a raised temperature, you weren't allowed in. So instead of like IDing you, they were temperaturing you. So they really had it under control. I was concerned going there, but they had it very much under control. And it was only another 2 weeks really since after I got back to Sydney, that 2 or 3 weeks that Australia kind of fell into line with all the isolation and stuff like that.
Yeah, that was the interesting thing about traveling with Stu, is we got to see the response from so many different countries, and the different, and that was why it was so hard, I think, for us to really gauge how serious the whole thing was, because like we only got temperature checked twice on this whole thing. Once with Singapore, where we're with you, and then one was in Botswana, and everywhere else was business as usual. Germany was very quiet and locked down, and that's when we started to think, okay, this is serious now. Let's switch to live streaming. We can't do shows anymore. But then we got to the UK, and it was business as usual again.
When you were in the UK, Boris Johnson was still working on the herd immunity theory, right? Whereas Germany got it on super early to isolation, and so it is interesting. As you say, you would have really seen the different approaches. Like Sweden, for instance, they're going for the kind of herd immunity thing as well. So it's confusing. It's hard to understand what the hell's going on, because it seems quite surreal. Like even in Australia, there's people flooding to the beach on a sunny day, and then New York is basically about to collapse and turn into that Kurt Russell film, Escape from New York. Great film, by the way, guys. Great film.
Yeah, man. Crazy time. So I'm just going to do a quick shout out to everyone who's watching on Facebook. Sorry, I don't know what's happened. They've changed something at Zoom. People can't get in, but hopefully you're watching now. You can still try and get in if you want. But this is why we're doing that in both ways. But just to fill you in, Josh, we've been doing this for a while now, and I found it personally just so interesting and helpful to talk to especially different creative people across many different fields. And I can guarantee everyone who's been listening in is in such a better position from these talks.
It's great.
Just to know that other people are in the same situation, especially artists big and small. So you've been talking to a lot of colleagues and industry people, I suppose, what's the read of the room for musicians?
Yeah, I mean, I've been, really digging deep with all this stuff. I went on Q&A the other night, which was one of the most intense things I've ever done. Super nerve-wracking, and like a panel of, very dry, very educated, but it was a pretty dry panel. It was like economists and the CEO of the Commonwealth Bank and a bunch of politicians. And I was on Q&A on the night that the government announced the latest round of subsidies. So I think, and that's only going to get passed into Parliament. It's going to get legislated on Wednesday, assuming that it all goes ahead, which they're assuring bipartisan cooperation. But there's been a lot of confusion about if that's going to apply to musicians, because as we all know, creatives and arts workers and musicians, we do traditionally fall through the cracks with government subsidies and stuff, because it's really hard to exactly, communicate what our business models are, and also one of the biggest things is if they're part of the criteria for eligibility for these things is that you have to prove that your income has gone down by 30% compared to last year. Musicians work in a famine or feast industry. We can earn, a bunch of money one month and then do, not earn any money for 2 months. So I'm cautiously optimistic, and I'm hopeful that all the subsidies will be applicable to artists and to musicians who work under these strange business models. And certainly people like the PPCA, who I'm on the board of, and APRA, who I've had a long association with, they're meeting with Paul Fletcher and like sitting down and, really taking him through what musicians and artists require. So I am cautiously optimistic, but yeah, the lay of the land is still very, very confusing for artists to know if we're going to be eligible for this kind of subsidy. And if we're not, I mean, I don't know what a lot of people are going to do,
I watched your Q&A segment. I think you articulated things very well, and was a good representative for the music industry. And I like what you said about...
I was quietly shitting myself though. I was so scared, absolutely scared.
I can imagine. Yeah, it's... I guess, it's. Have you always thought that that'd be something great to be on Q&A?
I always wanted to be on Q&A, but not on like the most important one ever, I'd like to be on Q&A talking about like the importance of music and culture in society, not on like the fact that the world is literally ending. And I felt out of my league for sure. Out of my depth.
Well, I felt you were the only interesting one to listen to. It was very hard to listen to the other guys. Yammer
especially the CBA guy talking about regulators easing up on the banks. Like, that's not a good thing. Like, regulators easing up on banks is not a good thing. And then when the question came through, which is a great question about the value, monetary value versus sort of societal value, and how what the equivalent is. And the question was something like, how do you justify that you as the CEO of the CBA are getting paid $8.2 million a year versus a nurse who's on the front line of this pandemic getting paid, $34,000 a year. And he just moved on really quickly from that.
Well, I agree with what you said about artists are generally optimistic people, and we're used to slipping through the cracks and having to hustle and kind of band together and find creative solutions to adapt to different situations. So, are you finding that now? Like, how are you? What's your brainstorming like when you're thinking, how obviously you've had months of touring revenue just disappear, like every other musician. Are you now having to think of innovative ways to still make a living?
Yeah, I mean, without delving into my financial situation, the thing for me was I'd pretty much taken 2 years off touring before this. So I was definitely thinking, okay, now I'm getting back to earning an income now after 2 years. I mean, artists, obviously, at a certain level, you definitely do earn, royalties and stuff like that, but they certainly don't equal a full income. And I've got 2 kids and I live in Sydney, and it's an expensive life. So it's it's a concern in terms of figuring out other things to do. I mean, I also write kids books, so that sort of stuff kind of has helped hugely. I do production in my studio where I am right now. So I'm doing sessions with people, but one-on-one. So I recorded my touring drummer, Russell Crawford, here on Friday. And that was, we were very cautious about disinfecting and staying, like we literally, I sprayed down my studio with Glen 20 before he came, sprayed all the mics down, being careful. I know that he's self-isolating at home anyway. So, you can still do that kind of stuff, but I guess my biggest concern is during this period, I feel, and this is not for me, this is not only for me, this is for musicians in general, is that musicians are really good at getting around disruption. Like we are an industry that has come through disruption really well, coming from, piracy and then transitioning into streaming and all this kind of stuff. So we've done really well with that. And that's why I feel positive and optimistic that artists in general, but, speaking about musicians, which is what I know most about, I feel like we will figure some stuff out. I don't quite know what it is yet, but one thing that I'm concerned about is that whilst I love doing, this is not about this particular thing, this is very different, but like, doing the streaming concerts like Isolate and stuff like that, I think they're really fantastic for bringing communities together and spreading a bit of hope and fun and entertainment, which is part of the role of musicians, to inspire and entertain. That's what we love to do as well. So it's an outlet for that. But one thing I am concerned about is that punters will become accustomed to artists just kind of going above and beyond all the time to just pump out content, which is a full-time job. Let me tell you, like, it takes a lot of time and effort to set these things up and to do them. I do have a slight concern that unless we kind of figure out a way to not necessarily monetize it, but limit those streaming concerts so that they're not the equivalent of an actual concert, and that we don't sort of inadvertently transition everybody during this period into just watching concerts online. I think that it's been proven over the years that nothing replaces a live music experience. It's always been the thing that, throughout the last 20 years of the music industry, live performance does always trump anything that you see online and all this kind of stuff. So I think that that's true, but I think for me, when I'm doing these streaming things like Isolate and, just little streaming live streams and stuff on Instagram Live, I'm personally trying to limit to 15 to 20 minutes max, so that it's not a huge investment of my time. And I'm not basically just giving myself away all the time. And I know it sounds like a bit of a whinge, and I'm prepared to defend myself against that, but that's how I feel. I do feel like artists do need to protect the inherent value of the conceptual value of their work.
No, I think so too. I think there is a danger of, and it sucks because, the arts are what everybody turns to in a crisis, and artists always step up. You see it in the bushfire crisis. We see it now.
Exactly.
To console the community, to bring people together. Artists are always the first one to step up, and then it's been amazing. But yeah, the other part of me is like, okay, so now is this the new normal that artists will live stream for free? It's even worse. Yeah. It's becoming it. And the same thing is kind of happening with me. I've been running these Zoom sessions, and it's been really great. And a camera company actually contacted me and said, we want to adapt in this time. We'd love you to do online Q&A on Zoom. We'll get people to buy tickets. And I had to say, well, I've kind of been doing that exact thing for free for the past 2 weeks. I can't exactly run a ticketed thing now.
But so this is one thing that I've been considering, and it's very applicable to what you're saying. So podcasters for years and years and years have been saying they'll do something like this, and they'll say this Zoom, seminar or this little bit of streamed content is brought to you by such and such, right? So perhaps with the camera company, instead of ticketing the event, maybe they just give you a free camera or something, or pay you a fee to host these things, use both of your networks to get the word out, and you just have a big banner in the back of your thing there saying this is brought to you by camera company X. That's the sort of thing that I've been looking into with my management, is about, because the flip side is I also love producing the content, as I'm sure you do, Jared. It's like, it's fun to do this kind of stuff and to engage with people. So maybe one model is, and that I'm trying to explore, I don't really know how it would work yet, so any suggestions I'm open to. But for instance, there are lots of companies that would normally advertise in all the spaces that I would normally play at. So basically booze companies who are not able to advertise. People are still buying booze, right? But they can't advertise as much. So I have, a studio here that I'm sitting in. My internet is broken at the moment, but when it's up and running, my studio is hardwired. It's like NBN. I can stream good content from my studio. I can figure out a way to get my recording console to spit it out straight into my phone or camera or whatever. So one model that I'm looking into is, instead of just going okay, I'm going to do a stream concert. If you want to donate, do this. Or instead of going through a third party streaming, there's those streamed gig third party companies that actually you sell tickets to it through them and everything. Instead of doing all that, I'm wondering if it's just simpler to say to a company that wants to advertise, just pay me to create this content, and I have a good reach, they'll have a good reach. You could invite other artists, or you could do split screen Instagram live sessions and invite other musicians in to do chats together and each play a song, expand the reach potentially to a new audience for the brand. And I don't think, and that way, at this time in history when everyone's pretty worried about money, you're not asking punters to pay for a ticket or go above and beyond and pay to engage in this thing. They're already paying, they're already potentially paying for subscriptions on Netflix or Prime or whatever. This is just a way to basically do the thing that we're all doing anyway, but be paid for what is essentially a type of service, So that's something I'm looking into. I don't know exactly how it's going to work yet, but I'm looking at it pretty seriously.
I think it's interesting. I think it's really smart, and I think that's probably the way that it will all kind of end up shifting in a way. People find out it happens with every kind of free platform that springs up, whether it's Instagram or TikTok or whatever it is. And I feel like that's now with this time with things like Zoom or things live streaming becoming more common. It's great. It's a great honeymoon period right now, but then sooner or later people are like, well, to keep doing this, we do need to be sustained financially. There has to be some, and then brands start creeping in, and then I think, and all this change. Who knows? Maybe it's a good thing that once after this is all over, all these diversified business models will still exist, and then suddenly once you come out of it, you've set yourself up with a business that has multiple streams rather than relying on going out touring all the time.
So I think what you just said is really true and very important to point out, because, excuse me, one thing that, I've been talking to industry people and to my manager and label and everything. So, whilst all this is going on and whilst my touring's been postponed until October, that's a long time away. That whole touring was tied, intimately to the release of my record. So I've released one single, about to release another single in a week and a half or so. That's why we were in Singapore when we saw you, is because we were shooting a film clip in Singapore for one of the songs. So we're trying to adapt and figure out ways to. So when you're touring and you're releasing an album, you're engaging with punters every single night. There's nothing beats like, face-to-face content, face-to-face contact, sorry, and saying like on stage every night to, however many people it is, I've got this new record coming out, be part of that. Like you're here now, I'm going to play the song, be part of it. Let's have a connection. Nothing beats that type of connection. And so certainly now that I'm not able to do that, we're worried about like how effective a release could be, because the other thing is when you release an album, you go out and you do the promo rounds. So you go and do interviews with people, you go and do TV shows and all this. All of those things are just gone at the moment. So it's really important for me to try and think of different ways to still engage people and make them part of the album release process. And what you said before about, like hopefully at the end of this, we can all bounce back and potentially learn from what we've kind of figured out how to get through this period and keep it going. And if you do have a brand that's, if you do have a brand as an artist that's, whether or not you're a, photographer, creative, visual artist, musician, if you have a brand that's strong going into this thing, and if you can keep your brand strong throughout it, I do believe that by the end of this, you will be in a better position. And that's why I do feel optimistic. But it means you can't drop the ball, and nobody can. Like in any job that anybody has, everybody's working their asses off to keep their job, so that at the end of this, they can kind of fire the whole thing back up again. But for one of I think there's lots of ways to do things, and I do believe that creatives are always the ones that develop these ideas. And I do feel positive that we'll do it again through this period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if that, like we said, it's not the time to drop the ball. Obviously, there's a lot of changes, and people need space and time to process it all. But don't drop the ball at the same time, because and I think it's a necessary shake-up for a lot of businesses. Maybe I'm seeing so many businesses now. They've been forced to develop their website, forced to include an e-commerce section in there, which they never had before. So it might be forcing businesses to like do the innovation that was always necessary anyway. And then now you have to survive. And once it's over, go back to normal, plus have this extra side to your business.
I guess the only thing I think about that, which I said on Q&A as well, is, and this is not so much for musicians and stuff, but for hospitality in particular, there's a lot of people saying, well, like they can just start doing deliveries and orders and all this kind of stuff. And I think people will have to adapt and set up e-commerce sites and all that. But I think we all have to, like, just society has to also acknowledge that's like really difficult. It's actually quite hard to like set up a whole separate business. It takes financial investment as well, which is a good segue to this next thing. So the Oz Council I just saw today has announced 3 tranches of grants to help as well. And part of it, one of them is to help. I think it's called the Adapt grant or something like that, but it's to help artists have a little bit of money to transition into whatever it is that they need to do to get through this period. So whether or not it's like literally buying some better gear to stream things or whatever, you don't have to acquit the grant either. You just have to show your idea and stuff. So that's something for all artists out there is definitely worth looking into. The Oz Council's very latest set of grants. There's 3 of them. Well, I think it's called the Resilience Package, and one of them is a Survive grant. One of them's the Pivoting grant, and one of them's for Future Works. So I think it's worth looking into. And also the state governments have released a whole bunch of quick response grants that are applicable to people who have directly lost income from tours or, future income from tours. So there's a lot of stuff beyond the government subsidy that is out there. That's definitely worth looking into for artists.
Do you think? I think one way of looking at it that's come up through these chats is that it actually might be a real great opportunity for especially emerging artists and younger artists right now, because the people that have been hit the hardest, or the people that have had the most to lose, are probably the bigger artists or the more established photographers, for example. You know, they're charging premium, they have a lot of money, a lot of investments up in the air, and then this has just hit. Whereas if you're an emerging artist, you might only have had a handful of people coming to your shows anyway, so you actually haven't lost as much as everybody else. And now maybe this is a bit of an equalizer. And for example, the ISO aid you played in, you know, a musician that would, you know, not normally have the chance to be on the same bill as bigger artists such as yourself, now find themselves as part of this thing.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's an interesting point, and I think how that plays out, I'm not sure. I think, you know, cream rises to the top. So for sure, if there's an artist that is a great undiscovered artist, you know, it could also be great for people that just hate performing at actual clubs. Seriously, like some people might have, you know, like massive anxiety issues or something, they just can't do it, and maybe the move towards streaming could be an opportunity for them. Absolutely, and I do think the isolated thing is a good example of, you know, because as you say, there was you know, bigger artists playing on the same, you know, virtual bill as emerging artists, and that's the sort of thing that, and we all had the same sized names on the banners, right? So when I'm probably saying something that everybody knows, but like when you're part of what you negotiate, when you're, you know, negotiating a fee for a festival is your billing size, like literally the percentage size that your name is on the poster. So for instance, like if I was going to be playing with, you know, John Butler and Missy Higgins, you know, they'd probably get 50% billing or whatever, and I'd get like 30% billing, or what, you know what I mean. So that's part of what you actually negotiate. So sometimes you will say you take a slightly smaller fee for bigger billing. You know, it seems crazy, but that's how it works. So in Isolate, it was, as you say, Jared, a great equalizer, because everyone just had the same little name on this huge list of things. But I think more so than that being an opportunity for people, I think that is a great example of how how artists rally when shit like this happens. You know, like we kind of put our egos aside and go, oh fuck yeah, I'll do this thing because people need it right now and it's a good thing to do. So I think that's again something that, you know, is worth acknowledging, is that, you know, we will rally, as you said before. You know, we're artists are always the first ones to jump up and play for Wave Aid or fire relief or whatever. But in this particular crisis, we're the first ones whose livelihoods have been, you know, diminished, and we'll be the last ones to be unaffected by this because of the gathering law, which the gatherings law is going to last way longer than, you know, people being able to go back to office jobs and stuff like this. So it is highly likely that I will be unable to tour until October, and it is likely that it could continue beyond that. Like that's what the modeling is currently saying. So yeah, I think it is important to keep in mind that artists are kind of putting their egos aside just to kind of get through this shit and be in it together, you know?
Do you think that this whole situation will, I mean, my hope is this, I don't know if it will happen or not, is that there is a greater appreciation for the arts just amongst the community, because maybe people are realizing that in times like this, what they are turning to is music, movies, books. My hope is that, just people, especially policymakers, realize that the arts is actually an important function. That's what people are turning to now. And maybe we get arts back out of the transport portfolio.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I hope so too. And we, you know, before this all happened, you know, I was in Portland mixing my record, just in December, the sort of through December, just before Christmas, I came home, and I was over in Portland mixing this record, feeling great about arts and music, and loving life. And then that's when the government rolled the arts portfolio into the infrastructure and transport or whatever the fuck it is. And I was just like, it just felt like a kick in the guts. I was like, man, because of the work that I do with the PPCA and APRA and stuff, like I know all the statistics. I know how much money the arts industry in general, but the music industry contributes to the Australian economy every year. We like go above and beyond to try and get those stats, because the government really whoa, someone jumping in, because the government really only responds to data, right? And so over the years, musicians and artists have seemed like eccentric artists and everything, and certainly that's part of all of our personalities and lives, and that's great. But we're also serious people that run small businesses and know how to market and know how to do jumping from one thing to another, doing graphic design and doing our own marketing and running our own campaigns and all this kind of stuff. We're not just like eccentric Fruit Loops out there just creating art. We do that as well, and we are that as well. But one thing that I hope comes out of this, back to what you were saying, Jared, is that I think people will appreciate the art of it, but I do hope that the government looks at the bottom line during this period and looks to the economy and goes, holy shit, there is because like APRA put together this website of lost your gig or whatever it was called, to collect data to show exactly what the opportunity cost was from this crisis. So there's been something like 200,000 gigs cancelled, and something like $500 million of money that is been sucked out of the Australian economy because of lack of gigs specifically. The music industry contributes $15 billion to the GDP every year. The creative sector as a whole contributes $115 billion. That's way more than the airline industry, right? And the government straight away gave a huge subsidy to the airlines, and then the airlines went and fired half their staff, right? So we can't fire ourselves. We can't cut costs really more than we do, because we are us. I can't chop off my arm and get a subsidy for that because I've cut down on, But so the point is, I think that the community will really, so there's a few things. I think the community will go, wow, arts has really got us through this. Culture and creativity, even looking at TikTok, the creativity that people do on TikTok, it brings a smile to your face. It's great. I think the community will say, yes, the arts has got us through this. What we have to make sure is that we don't train the community to think that arts should be free again, which is what we had to do when piracy was a huge issue. And basically the way that you do that is what we did with streaming, which is to provide a platform that is easy to pay for, that still feels free, right? So that's the two things. And then the third thing is we have to keep pushing to government through this whole thing. And we basically have to create our own narrative. So I don't think we can sit around waiting and hoping for the government to realize that we've really helped a lot during this period, and that our contribution has helped their what's the word for people that vote for people? Voters? Yeah, anyway. So hopefully the government will realize that we've helped their community, but also they will look at the bottom line and go, holy shit, during this period that artists were out of the market, we can see that the GDP has gone down by, billions and billions of dollars. We need to make sure that we focus on these guys more when all this shit's over. So I also feel hopeful about that, Jared, is the same thing that you were saying, but I do feel like we can't sit around hoping that they're going to think that. I think we have to control the narrative and just keep pushing it in their face and saying, look what we're doing to help everybody. And please acknowledge what we have contributed in the past and what we will contribute again, assuming we can fire our economy back up when this is all over.
Mm. Hey, if anyone has any question, Sorry.
Oh yeah, I just want to say one quick thing on that, because the thing that a lot of people, and I didn't get a chance to say this in on Q&A, but it's really important, is that the music industry relies heavily on risk, right? So a promoter or an artist that's going out on the road, when we do that, we sell tickets. If we don't sell the tickets, we still have to pay our session musicians. We still have to pay venue hire. We still have to pay, even if we make a net loss, we still have to pay our managers and our booking agencies their commissions. Same with promoters promoting tours. They have to front up all the money. So our industry relies heavily on risk, and it's not going to just be the same as a business who has been operating all the way through this thing, but on a lean scale. We need to actually fire this whole industry back up again by having some kind of injection of, I don't know if we can request another subsidy. I think that's probably too much to ask for, but we do need some kind of situation to ensure that people are actually going to be in a position to stick their necks out again and fund all these things to fire our industry back up. The end. End of rant.
Great rant. I just wanted to say, if anyone wants to throw anything to Josh or anything up for discussion, chuck it in the chat or on Facebook. I'm looking at both. Joanna said this, coming back to one of our earlier points, which she says, big artists currently rely on their following and fans. Emerging artists don't have that following, so they'll struggle to be seen. Yeah, I agree with that, but I guess what I was saying was, that's one part of it. Having a huge, like, the big artist is going to have a huge following no matter what. But now that touring aspect, and that they've had a lot more to lose comparatively than someone who's emerging. And I feel that, like, if you were a smart, hustling young musician right now, I'd be looking at all the cracks and looking at what can I create in this period? How can I stand out? Is there ways of getting my name out now that nobody can play live? Now's the time to set up my stage, like, virtually. What would you say what would you say to an emerging artist right now? What would you be doing, say, if you were in your first couple of years of
yeah, I mean, I think it's a great point, Jared. I think that as I've said several times during this chat, artists find a way. Like, we're compelled to create art, and we're compelled to get it out to a following and an audience of whoever that audience is. So I don't think this is any different, and I totally agree with you that there are opportunities out there. What those opportunities are, I don't know off the top of my head now, but I don't need to find those opportunities from a emerging artist point of view. And I'd be interested to hear from emerging artists to see if there were opportunities. But so I mean, I guess one example is the JP Partnership grant that I run. I'm still running that. I mean, it's probably the worst time in my history to ever be co-funding a grant. I should just make myself the winner and just call it the JP grant and keep the money. But I'm committed to doing it because I do believe in emerging artists having help, right? So, I think access to grants and stuff could be more accessible now than previously, because it's comparatively, proportionally, I may have lost more opportunities than what am I trying to say? So what you're saying is these people don't have huge followings anyway, so they have less to lose, but proportionally it's probably the same in that. So say one person who plays 10 gigs a year has lost 10 gigs, that's still a loss of 100%. I play, 50 gigs a year, I've lost all those gigs, it's still a loss of 100%. So we're all trying to figure it out. And I think that, as you say, a young hustling artist will find a way to break through. I don't know what it'll be. Maybe it's things like TikTok. I'm 42. I'm not going to get on TikTok now. I struggle with just figuring out Instagram, So I'm not going to do that. So in all seriousness, maybe TikTok is a space that emerging artists could really dominate on right now.
Yeah.
That's just something off the top of my head. all this live streaming stuff, I'm sure some young artists could figure out some way to do something that's really captivating, in the same way that artists have done it forever. I mean, our mutual friend, Passenger Mike, he was a guy that couldn't, for whatever reason, couldn't conform into the normal radio thing. So he disrupted. He went out busking and he found a way. I'm sure that there's an equivalent of that in this scenario that somebody will figure out. I don't know what it is. If I knew what it was, I'd try and jump on that bandwagon too.
I just try and draw on like an analogy to something like the share market. In a big boom time, that's not the time that you want to be entering it. But once it's crashed, like that's the time. That's when you want to buy in, because you have so much more room to grow then. Hey, we've got a question from Facebook here from Charlie. She's an amazing photographer in Queensland, and she says, "What are your thoughts on releasing new work during this time? Is it offensive to release new art and music while the world is on fire, or is it needed?"
I mean, I think art needs to be authentic. And I think people smell bullshit and smell, if somebody was trying to take advantage of the situation, for instance, and released a song called, like, I just want to go viral or something like that.
What? Someone's writing that down right now.
That's actually a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
Let's get this shit viral. Stella's writing it down, making that. So I think as long as it's authentic art, I mean, I am literally releasing an album during this period, and of course that was organized a year ago, so it's not like I've just decided to do it now. If I had known that this would happen, I probably still would release it anyway, because I'm compelled to produce art. Like, that's just what I do. I need to get it out and put it out in the world. This is potentially the worst time in history to release new art, but then again, maybe that'll be proven not to be the case, because people have a real appetite for content now. I don't know, but I don't know if it's good or bad. I don't know if it'll be a successful or unsuccessful time to release art in this period, but I do believe that as artists, we're compelled to do it. And as long as the art that you're producing and releasing in this period comes from an authentic place, as always, then I think that's to be encouraged, definitely.
And I do think that in times like these, a lot of great art is born, such as your sleeper hit,
Let's Go Viral.
Go Viral, which I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, I think that, this is like such a shake-up, like around the entire world. This is as much pain as everything that is bringing, it's sure to inspire a response, an emotional response from so many people. I think there's something else that's just popped up.
But I have a feeling that we're going to see that. We're going to see that art. We're going to see the COVID-19 inspired art in 6 months to a year. You know what I mean? Because everyone will be getting. It's so new. Everyone's going to start getting inspired by this situation in the next few months, and art can take a while to produce. So I think there's going to be. It's like what was there was some statistic that like heaps of babies were born 9 months after some previous crisis, because everyone was stuck indoors with nothing to do. And I think I think that's potentially true about creative babies, like art babies. A lot of that stuff will get born sort of 6 to 9 months from now.
Got a lot of time to incubate in lockdown.
Incubate, good. Incubate. Gestate, shall we say?
Sadia said, apparently record sales have gone up during this pandemic. That's good news for you, and it's good news for Stu. He released his record about 2 days ago.
Yeah, I mean, Jack Carty as well, a mutual friend of ours, he's releasing music right now as well, and he's looking for ways. And these are independent artists as well, So I'm lucky that I have a label behind me that's still, their business is still operational. They still have a marketing team and promotional team still trying to get stuff happening. As an independent artist, I think it makes things harder, because you don't necessarily have access to the avenues that you normally would, even as an independent artist, like hiring a publicist and getting out on the road and doing the hand sell, which is what you have to do. So yeah, it's going to be tough, but I do think I'll keep coming back to this, but I do think that if you can keep your brand strong through this period, the people that do that and put the real effort into keeping your brand strong and authentic through this period, I think you will gain new fans during this period because you have a bit more of a captured audience, and then you'll pull those fans with you into the next phase of your career. I do believe that.
I was talking to Samantha Gash a couple of days ago. She's a ultra marathon runner, but also does a lot of corporate speaking, and she had a really good point as well, which was that like what you do now and then how you deal with your fans and your following and your clients, like what you do right now will be remembered for a long time. And she was talking specifically about dealing with clients because obviously she has a lot of corporate speaking gigs that were cancelled, and there's different ways that her colleagues have been reacting to that. Do you demand the deposit immediately and say lock it in, and kind of like, I don't know, just weasel in there and, just lock in all this stuff and don't approach it the right way. And her approach was that, no, I'm going to allow people to, obviously a gig's not going ahead, have the deposit back, and just being really gentle about it and working with clients and understanding that everybody has been hit really badly. Their business has been hit as well. And it's more important than to scramble and scrape in as much money as you can before it all runs out. She said it's more important to be just keep those relationships really strong, because once this is all over, they will remember who had the right attitude and who was
absolutely. And it's not just about keeping them keeping the relationship good. It's also acknowledging the fact that if for instance this person's demanding their deposits, you could potentially put the people out of business, and then you don't have an economy to get, you don't have an industry to get back into. It's the same with all the festivals that got cancelled. One of the festivals that I was going to be playing in the next, I would have already played it actually, was postponed, and this was put on by friends of ours. Like, everybody knows each other in the industry, and there was no way I was going to go like, no way, man, I need that deposit, I need it now. And it's not good business. You have to balance professionalism with friendship in this industry, and that's a very difficult thing. And it's something that I think a lot of corporations could actually learn from, because we're very good at balancing business with friendship, because we have to learn diplomacy really early on. Like, anybody that's ever been in a band knows that you have to learn diplomacy as one of the very first. I credit any kind of negotiating skills or diplomacy skills that I have from being in a band from the time that I was 11 years old all the way through until I was 24 all those skills were learnt from being in a band. So you really have to find that balance in this period, so that you're keeping your friends, you're supporting the ecosystem of your industry, and protecting yourself if you need to, but having an industry to return to when this is all over.
Exactly. All right, we've got one more and then we'll let you go, but we have a question here from Regan. How do you see this impacting collaboration between artists and creators? Will we see new platforms emerging? Will artists have to rely more on what they can produce at home? I'll jump in real quick. I think there are interesting ways that will spring up with collaborating. For example, I was meant to be filming a bunch of videos with Passenger and some other artists as well, and obviously that can't happen anymore. And first response to everything shutting down, I was like, okay, well, we're just not going to do it. And then after, I was like, well, no, we still want a music video for your release. So how can we do this? And we're exploring different ways of gathering footage, crowdsourcing footage. Is there something I can do on my end? Can we turn it into stop motion? Like, what are different ways of doing this where I don't even have to be with Mike? So that's one way that's something that I've been, just talking with a few people about. How can we still be a part of each other's work without being there in person? So it's interesting. Have you, has anything popped up on your end music wise?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing that I'm setting up with Jack Carty, who I mentioned earlier, is we're going to do Zoom songwriting sessions together. So, we're going to do one this Wednesday and similar thing to what we're doing now, split screen. We're going to, you know, jam on ideas back and forth. And it's a way to stay creative, but it's also a way, I mean, the way that artists deal with stress is to create, I think is fair to say, whether it's to purge those emotions from ourselves or just as a form of, you know, distraction from whatever's stressing you out. And, you know, Jack and I are old mates, and I want to still be in his life creatively and as a mate. So, yeah, we're going to do songwriting sessions via Zoom. I think there's lots and lots of ways that you can do stuff like that. And sorry, yeah, you go.
So I think that's coming back to like ways that this shake-up will actually make an industry stronger. It's things like that, you know, as it becomes more normal and as technology gets better and more accepted to collaborate virtually, you know, that will start opening up like way more like pathways to collaborate with people. Like you would never have normally thought that you would just jump on Zoom and collaborate with someone across the other side of the world. You'd be like, no, I've got to be there in person. You know,
I don't even know what Zoom was like 2 weeks ago. You know?
but now I think, as it becomes more normal, you won't set that parameter on yourself anymore. There might be some amazing artists in Botswana where I just was, and you're like, okay, well, we could probably still collaborate, you know, without meeting each other.
And you know, this potentially goes back to your point about emerging artists. You know, building communities of artists is what has always helped emerging artists come through the ranks, right? And so this could be an opportunity for emerging artists to form their own little posses of, like, you always need a scene, right? Like when I was coming up through the ranks in a punk band, there was a scene of about 4 or 5 bands. We all played the shows and we organized shows together and we self-promoted our shows. And that's how we kind of came up through the ranks. That's how we like learnt about how to promote shows and about how to make posters and put ads in the drum media and all that stuff. When I became a singer-songwriter, it was the same again. There was a scene of similar musicians around that time, you know, but it was very parochial. It was very Australian at that time. And so for emerging artists, it could be a great opportunity to link up with artists in Canada or you know, the Netherlands or other markets that support your type of music, and just find them on Instagram. Find an artist that is of a similar size to you in another territory. Reach out to them on Instagram. You have access to anybody, and set up a bloody Zoom call and write a song together. You know, like that would be an amazing result to come out of this, to break down barriers. And it's sort of, and maybe we can finish on this if this is wrapping up. But one thing, years ago, I saw a lecture by a academic called Guy Morrow that some of you might know. He probably taught some people at Macquarie Uni. But he I went to a lecture by him where he was comparing bands to startups, and he was saying, "Is a band effectively a startup?" And it sort of goes back to what I was saying before about how there's a common misconception that artists in general are, you know, fruity, you know, disorganized, creatively, you know, virile, but not very good at organizing their lives. And he was saying, basically, if you think about what a startup is, and afterwards I got fascinated by this concept, and I read a book called The Lean Startup by Eric Rice, his name is, and it's all about agile, the whole thing about agile businesses and all this. Anyway, what he was saying was basically you've got corporations employing people and you know, being charged hundreds of thousands of dollars in consultancy fees to make their companies agile. And essentially musicians have been doing this for years, because what we do is we pivot. As soon as we need to, we pivot and we find a way to make things work. And as soon as we need to, we are like technically agile. We send out what's called MVPs, which is minimum viable products. So we send out demos to people all the time. And when we get feedback of one set of demos, we pursue that. If we get no feedback from a whole other swathe of songs and stuff, we don't pursue that. So I feel very strongly that artists are inherently very clever at adapting to this kind of stuff. And as creatives, we will absolutely find a way to engage. You know, we're going to see some, I think we will, I agree with you, Jared. I think we're going to see some really cool shit come out of this, as devastating as it is and has been in many, many ways. I do think that, at least in the creative world, I think that we'll see some pretty amazing shit coming out of this.
Me too. Okay, thank you everybody. I'm sorry to anyone on Facebook who couldn't get in. My apologies. I don't know. I'll try and fix it for next time. But thanks, Josh. Thanks for your time.
Pleasure. That was good fun.
Oh wait, let me unmute everyone again. We might get a lot of feedback, but okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Josh.
Guys.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
guys. Thank you so much.
Good luck with
See
the
you,
album
everyone.
release.
Thanks,
Thank
dude. Thanks.
All right. End meeting. Oh, end recording. Oh no, I don't know how to do